these lateralities, these elsewheres, how this connects with the idea of institution and what institution may be. It's not an argument against the university ways of doing things. This is a lecture, after all, complete with PowerPoints. We've all been through universities. We're in university territory. We've got our passion for philosophy, largely through our study through university. It's a question about what outside the university we can now do as well. So, let me give a particular instance which comes from my own background and training, which is literary studies. I've always been attracted to philosophy. My MA was on Sartre and Beckett, and when I was studying for my PhD at Sydney University in the early 80s, along with a lot of my friends and colleagues, I shared the excitement of reading Continental philosophy as it became available. Foucault, Althusser, Deleuze, Serre, above all Derrida, and me. And for a while now, Lacan. Much later, Badiou, as he's become available. My PhD involved Thomas Pynchon, Michel Serre, and Jacques Derrida. I taught literature at UNSW and what's now UTS, and then got hired at UQ, primarily to teach theory, but also adjacent literature and cultural studies. When I arrived, I had a string of postgraduates beating away to my door that felt the need that whatever we're doing, we need to be doing theory. They'd present me with theses that looked pretty much complete, and asked me, where can I put theory in this? It was often disparagingly called French theory, in the sense that it's neither English nor literature. Not so much at UQ, which was actually very welcoming of it, I've got to say. More respectable label, literary theory, was a large part of what I thought. Essentially, philosophy. When you absorb something into a different discipline, the strategy of renaming it says, this is ours, it answers our needs, so you rename it according to what you're doing. If you look at the Norton Anthology of Literary Theory, which is now in its 3rd edition, a big book like a Besser brick, it's now become the Norton Anthology of Theory and Criticism. You look at the names in it. Moses Maimonides, Aquinas, Hume, Hegel, Marx and Engels, Nietzsche, Saussure, Freud, Hayek of all people, Lacan, Arendt, Levi-Strauss, Althusser, Hayden White, Baudrillard, Habermas, Bourdieu, Stuart Hall, Benedict Anderson, Latour, Agamben. So philosophers, yes, but also economists, political economists, sociologists, cultural studies people, psychoanalysts, anthropologists, historians, theologians, linguists, all brought together. This and this and this as literary theory. So how can we model this and this chaotic, rather chaotic cramming together of all sorts of very different things within an institutional situation? How can we model this and that connects literary studies and philosophy? Well, one possible way of thinking of it would be the classic Venn diagram. There are a few problems here. Theory, philosophy doesn't quite belong to literary studies. In the words of a former colleague, a theorist is someone you call in to do your heavy lifting. Literary theory doesn't quite belong to philosophy either. It deals with fiction, poetry, the things Plato eliminated from the Republic, which we don't necessarily even find considered in much philosophy. Badiou tends to dismiss period of poetry, calls the age of the poets. So he doesn't write poetry himself, he writes theatre and novels. He hasn't written a novel for a long time. So it's misleading that blob in the centre doesn't really represent something that belongs to either of the things on either side. But it's an odd sort of non-belonging. It's haunted all the time by what it's pushing off to one side. That demand for being theoretically informed is an essential part of scholarly coherence dimension. Not for any particular theory, just for theory. You take it on board, you get a hulking theorist to move all the tea chests and the piano into the loft, and you send them on their way with a payment of getting mentioned in the apparatus. Any particular theory can be applied, it seems, to all literature. All theories can be applied to any particular text. There's a mutual relationship of application involved there. So the overlap that's pictured there is not quite accurate. It suggests a commonality that isn't there. We've got things that have very little in common that are actually yoked together to produce something different. So something else might be needed. We could picture it this way. See what I've tried to do there, the break in the circles, suggesting that literary theory is superimposed over the literary texts. Well, we have the advantage there that there are no common areas. There's a different relation. It's as though we're peering through literary theory to some aspect of the literary text. It still remains an application. It's the reading of a particular work by a particular theory. Looking through a part of philosophy to a part, an aspect of the literary text. Philosophy, in this case, theory, is placed as a discourse that's supposed to know. It looks at and connects another discourse that's, in many cases, taken to be either deliberately or unwittingly deceptive, ideologically deceptive, or at least, or maybe just plain naive. Now that's a familiar stance from Lacan. It's precisely the one that the analyst has to refuse. The analysand may start off by treating the analyst as the one supposed to know. The first thing the analyst has to do, and keep doing, is refuse that role. In effect, what the analyst is always saying is, I certainly don't know, but let's keep talking. And in the course of that, you might come to realise something that you know without quite realising that you do know it. We can turn it around. What if we put the literary text on top? Oh, sorry, that's the space of the reading. What if we put the literary text on top like that? So we seem to have the same area in the centre, but it's actually quite different when you look at it this way. When philosophy is in front, it's an application of philosophy to the text. What can philosophy tell us about this text, which in a sense it already knows? When literature is in front, it's instead a question. What problems does this quite singular text pose for thinking? See how it's quite different. On the one side, we've got an application of what's already posited as known. Swap it around, and you've got a question about what's not yet assured as known. So that central sector is divided against itself depending on which one you give priority to. But either way, I think there's still a question about a model like that. Where does this link come from? on, the thing that holds the two together, that holds one over the other like a lens. What links them if we want to emphasise that what we have here isn't the Venn diagram relation with a subset that's common to both. We could picture two intersecting loops like that. Might be clearer if I exaggerate the 3D nature of it. Two things linked like a chain rather than the Venn diagram. One thing that's, I think, interesting and important about seeing things this way is that you can't ever lay those two quite flat. It's no longer a plane model. You try to, and the rings buckle. We have two lines that never intersect here. There and there. They don't provide this common sector where we colour in an area between them, an area of commonality. There's no common space between them. They have nothing in common. There's no conjunction in the logical sense. But they are interlinked, entangled. A sort of disjunct synthesis. But this model's misleading too. You can't separate those two rings. You can easily separate philosophy and literature. They're not interlinked as a given, as a necessity. Lacanians will know what's coming here. You can get around it by linking them together with a third ring. The famous Borromean knot. The peculiarity of this, if you look carefully, you'll see that no two of those rings are actually linked together. It's the interweaving of the third link that binds them together. If you take any one of those links away, the other two fall apart. And that works no matter which rings you start with. So what would this third ring be? Where do we see literature and philosophy linked? In the institution that teaches literary theory, of course. Now, let me talk about this institutional dimension in this example that I'm using, philosophy and something else. At first, when it was first introduced, and this is the story of what went on at UQ, it happened with variations in other universities around about the same time across the country. I think UQ handled that pretty smoothly. The introduction of theory and cultural studies in particular actually caused splits in departments like Macquarie. Two English departments at Macquarie for a while. In the late 1980s and 1990s, theory was optional but highly recommended if you wanted to go on to honours and further. Later on, it became a central, compulsory part of the major in literature. And there are two main reasons for that, and they go hand in hand, and neither of them are things you can derive simply from consideration of either the literary text or literary theory, philosophy on their own. They're not formal necessities of either. They come from yoking them together. During this time, until the present, there's an increasing regime of managerial demands for increased accountability and efficiency. And I hope you heard the scare quotes around those words. It saw departments amalgamated for administrative reasons into larger and larger schools. So the Department of English that I started working in, which included not only literary theory but also cultural studies, became the School of English, Media Studies and Art History, and then became... how's that?
No, still going.
Do you think it's the actual receiver maybe?